Hi, folks. Welcome to our weekly history chats. Merry Christmas, if I missed you, and Happy New Year. We're back from our holiday break, and one of the topics I thought would be interesting after hearing the news the other day about how New Year's Day tends to be the time where new laws come into effect. And actually, we heard this on the news the other day. They were talking about minimum wage laws in many states. Um, and various other laws in New York State and across the country that become effective on January 1st. And that got me to thinking about a conversation I had had while I was in the car, and we a couple months ago, and we were driving around here in East Aurora, and we came to a red light, and the question came up of when did this right on red thing, how weird it is, and how we become so used to it, and when did it become a thing, and had it always been a thing? And those of us who are less than 50 years old don't remember a time, actually, people who are even older than that don't remember a time when we didn't have right on red. And the concept is quite interesting. And quickly, the answer is no, it hasn't been a thing forever. It's actually less than 50 years old, the law that allows us to turn right on red. And we started talking about it because we saw someone turn right on red, and we're like, what an interesting concept, because that game you play, red light, green light, as a kid, you go on green and you stop on red, and there's no option for turning right on red. Well, this conversation happened, and a couple days later, I was looking through the archives of the East Aurora Advertiser through some microfilm, researching something completely different. And what tends to happen is I get distracted, and I stumble upon something else. And serendipitously or coincidentally or whatever, I came across a front page article in December of 1976, and a giant headline that said, Police Chief Explains Right Turn on Red Law. And it was a giant headline across the front of the newspaper, and it also included a graphic. There was this cartoon graphic um, explaining the law. And I thought, this is too coincidental that we were just talking about it and that I came across it. I will write about this because it's a fascinating, I'm fascinated by it, and I just think it's an interesting topic to explain a little more. But as I was getting that question as we were driving, and also with the new year, I thought it'd be kind of neat to talk about it, at least in broad terms now. But I will write more details about it, and I'm going to do a lot more research about it. Um, but essentially, what happened? Why do we have a right? Why do we allow you to turn right on red? Uh, and essentially, what happened? New York State actually enacted the law January 1st, 1977. And what had happened is several states at that period, 50 years ago, 1972, 1973, 1974, we were smack dab in the middle of an energy crisis. Gas stations were closed on Sundays and other days to try and people were encouraged to lower their use of gasoline. The cost of gas was higher. The government was taking steps to just really lower our usage of gasoline and other fuel. So we had an energy crisis at the time. Out of that, some states, California, I believe, being the first one, enacted the right on red law, and allowed you to turn right on red after you stopped. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Um, and the idea was that instead of idling at a red light, the more cars we could get to turn or go through a red light when it was safe, the less energy we were using, the less gasoline we were using. So California decided, well, if we allow people, and they did studies and they found out, if we allow people to turn right on red, treat the red light as a stop sign, rather than wait for it to turn green, we could save some energy. Well, then the federal government came out with enacted a law that and this happens with lots of laws that the federal government wants states to enact. So what they do is they tied federal funding to a state passing a law that the federal government wants. So in this case, the federal government wanted states to approve a right on red law. So they said, you won't get the funding unless this federal funding unless you approve the law. So a lot of states did that. New York and New Jersey being examples in January of 1977. And so all states now, I think all states do it. New York State enacted it on January 1st, 1977, with the exception of New York City for obvious reasons. If you had everybody turning right on red, and I think that's still the case in New York City. So they were exempted from that New York State law. But in the rest of New York State, you could turn right on red beginning January 1st, 1977. What they had to do now was make an exceptions for intersections that were where it wasn't safe. So communities like East Aurora had to put up signs that say no turn on red. And you still see those signs today, and that dates back to 1977. So there's articles in the newspaper talking about this effort of local governments, local highway departments putting up signs um, that for certain intersections that didn't apply to that law due to safety reasons. So the reason we can turn right on red is because of the energy crisis back in the mid 1970s, and when they wanted to conserve fuel, both at home fuel and your automobile fuel. And by being able to go through the intersection more quickly, it would save energy. So that's the reason why we have to this day you can turn right on red. The East Aurora Advertiser, as I mentioned before, they ran an article in December 1976, the article that I came across, and today we've gotten so used to being able to turn right on red, and we take our permit test at the DMV, right, and then we take our driving test. It's ingrained in the vehicle and traffic law. We know it. We know that we have to stop at the stop sign before we turn. Doesn't always happen, right? But imagine though that you're a driver and you have never been able to turn right on red. And so there was a public relations campaign by the DMV, federal highway organizations, and local police chiefs to explain the law. Because imagine you're driving and you've never done this before, and you never had to learn it on your driver test. So in late 1976, there's this publicity campaign, and this article in the East Aurora Advertiser explained it. And they actually had a little cartoon that explained, that if you stop in order to do this, and they said drivers, including bicycles. So if you're on a bike and want to make a turn on red at an intersection, that included you. So they were very specific about that. They emphasize that you must first come to a full, complete stop, look both ways before you proceed, making that right-hand turn on the red, and that you still must yield to vehicles that are coming in the opposite direction. And it seems silly today to have to explain that, but if you had never had that concept in your head before, you would be kind of lost. So they try to explain it in very simple terms. And they were very specific. It was funny. There's an entire, I'm looking here now, 3 columns on the front page of the East Aurora Advertiser explaining the role of motorists, the role of pedestrians in this whole new law. So it was a learning curve. And there's actually an article in the New York Times a few months later that started off where a police officer pulled over a young man who was driving, and he didn't do anything wrong. The story goes that the police officer pulled over the gentleman who was driving because he made a right turn on red. And the police officer said, "You're one of the first people we saw do it correctly," and they wanted to tell him that, whether that's true or not. But that's the story, that enough people were not understanding this right on red law that the person who did it correctly was actually the exception to the rule. So that just goes to show what how the law was being enforced and the reaction to it. Again, I'm going to do a lot more research about this locally, how it impacted East Aurora, because I'm curious just to see if there's a 6-month report or a year out and to see how it worked. So one of the impacts of the right turn on red law, and I talked to a police officer several years ago about, again, probably a different topic, and this one came up. but people were blowing, and as you know, you see people not stop when they turn on red. If they feel like if there's nothing, no one coming, they can just turn and treat it like a green light rather than a stop and then turn on red. And that's been an issue since the beginning. Um, but the police officer that I was talking to years ago about, we were having an issue, was when I worked at the newspaper and I was interviewing a police officer um, about the lack. People were blowing through red lights. They still do it today, but the fact that they would gun it and actually go through a red light. And he said his theory was that ever since the right turn on red law became effective, that motorists started disrespecting the red light, not just on the right turns, but red lights in general. And that he, through his experience, and he had been a police officer way before that, from the 50s on, I believe, 60s maybe. But he noticed, and this is totally anecdotal, that there was once you were able to turn right on red, um, that sort of gave permission to start having a gray area when it came to the red light, that you could disrespect it a little bit more. And that was his theory, that the red light wasn't taken as seriously after the right turn on red law. Not sure if that's true. I think actually that makes sense. Something I want to look more into, but that makes sense to me, that we see more of that. But the same issues that seem to be happening right after they approved this law back in 1977, enacted in 1977, we're still having today. People are not coming to a full stop, and we see it all the time. But do know that that's not a new problem. That was happening well back at the beginning when people were still trying to were learning the law. Again, they had no concept of it before that, so it was this whole new concept and this educational campaign that would seem silly to us. Um, of course, you come to a full stop and before you make the right hand turn, and you look both ways. But people didn't understand it, and to say you could just turn right on red, that some people may have been under the false impression that you could just turn right on red for whatever reason. So there was this big campaign to get people to do it properly. And share what the law actually said. But it goes back to 1977, the energy crisis of the mid 70s, and it was, the purpose was to get people to go through, not idle at intersections as much, and that would save energy. And of course, the impact on our local traffic and local towns has been, that we are, you can go through intersections faster, but at least one police officer that I spoke with felt that it also impacted how we view red lights in small towns like East Aurora. So I thought that was interesting. So thanks again for joining me. I hope this topic was interesting to you. It was to me. Again, part of the local law or the statewide laws that become effective on January 1st each year. That's not a new thing. They always, it's a convenient date to start new laws. And this was one of them back on January 1st, 1977. Again, thanks for joining me. Thanks for keeping local history alive. Thanks for supporting this project. If you like what you're hearing, feel free, if you're not following the page, please do. Liking the page, feel free to share the video and reference it. That's why I do this. So thanks again for joining me. And again, if you have a topic idea that you're interested in, please put it in the comments or send me a private message, and I'll see what I can do. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.